15. The Sun's Crest. The ride northwest to Badwater was a long one, but thankfully uneventful. They left Elamar, with thanks to Lyrion's family for sheltering them, and then rode north. By nightfall, the weather had only grown colder, and Rygel was chilled to the bone by morning. Dendio woke them just after sunrise, and they set off again after a short meal. As they rode north, the rain turned into a gentle snow. It was late afternoon by the time the sound of the sea came to Rygel's ears, bringing a salty scent. Somehow he felt content. The sea was a place he was used to, a place he had grown up by. He squinted north, across the waters, wishing he could somehow see Gayrile, where he hoped Norin waited. "We're nearly there," Dendio said, sliding from his saddle. Lyrion had dismounted as well. "I'll head into town and buy us passage on the first ship headed to Sia. It won't be a moment." And with that he pulled his hood over his head and moved toward town. Tag looked to be enjoying the chilly weather, his fur fluffed out in the snow. Dendio had drawn his sword and was inspecting the blade. Rygel, interested, moved over toward him. "What are you doing?" "Sword got nicked up pretty bad when I was fighting the orcs," Dendio explained without looking away from his inspection. "I'll have to sharpen it when we reach Sia." Rygel watched as he slid it back into the scabbard. "Will you teach me to fight?" he asked hopefully. Dendio looked up at him, that familiar half-smile crossing his face. "Now?" Rygel nodded rapidly. "While we wait for Lyrion to get back, and maybe on the ship? Please, Dendio, it might be useful if we run into trouble when we get to Kersia. Besides, I've mostly felt in the way this whole trip," he added, a little ruefully. Dendio was still smiling slightly. Then he shrugged. "Very well. Grab the extra sword on the saddlebags. Go easy with that," he added, arching an eyebrow, as Rygel whipped the blade out with so much energy he nearly dropped it. He studied the eager young boy before him. "Did Norin teach you any fencing or anything like that?" "No, not really," Rygel said, staring at the sword in awe. "Well, I'll show you the basics. Plant your feet shoulder-width apart. Have your dominant foot forward a little, just like that. Now, that's a one-handed sword, so hold it as such." Rygel, who had been gripping the sword with both hands like a club, switched to holding it with one hand instead. The weight of it surprised him. Normally, when he'd watched people sword fight, they did it so effortlessly and calmly. He swung it clumsily toward Dendio, who stepped back quickly. "Hold on. Get used to the weight. If you're going to attack, commit to it. You don't want to stand there uncertainly, holding the sword, thinking about what you're going to do. Go fast. Get in and get back." He lunged forward mid-speak and tapped Rygel's blade lightly with his own. Rygel, startled by the sudden movement, swung at him, thrown off balance by the unfamiliar sword. But he quickly regained his footing, raising the blade again. "Good recovery," Dendio said, circling him. He held his sword loose and ready, looking quite comfortable. Rygel's wrist was starting to ache from the strain of holding the blade upright. He took a breath and lunged unexpectedly, slashing at Dendio again. The tall Lizney parried easily, the clang of the blade sending chills down Rygel's spine. "Parry with the flat of the blade if you can," Dendio said, spinning away. "That way you'll spare the edge from getting dinged and dented. It'll help keep it sharp during a fight." He lunged in again. Rygel managed to spin his sword slightly, catching Dendio's sword on the flat, then whisked his sword free and cut up sharply. Dendio dodged, spinning his blade in a blur, and slashed at him. Rygel pivoted to the side quickly and cut at the Lizney. He felt himself lose control of the blade mid-slash and half threw the sword into Dendio's previously injured arm. Dendio gave a sharp hiss of pain, dropping his sword and holding his arm. Rygel felt his stomach plummet. "Dendio, I'm sorry, I lost my grip." He stopped as he saw Dendio's shoulders shaking, and realized the Lizney was messing with him. "I've never seen someone throw their sword," Dendio panted, holding back his laughter, "but I suppose it could be quite effective." "Looked kind of cool, actually," Dusty commented unhelpfully from her place beside Tag. Maybe I'll have to implement it into the training of any new recruits for the Red Dawn," Dendio mused, a grin finally breaking through. Rygel shook his head. "I thought I hurt you. You're not funny, either of you," he added, glaring at Dusty, who was giggling. "We're hilarious," Dendio said coolly. He stretched his injured arm, finally dropping the joke. "Well done, Rygel. Control comes from strength, and strength comes with time. Keep working on it, all right?" Rygel looked up at him, smiling, feeling proud of himself despite the end of the fight. "I will. Thanks." Lyrion reappeared, holding a few papers in one hand. He paused slightly, looking at Dendio and Rygel, who were both still holding their swords and grinning. "Did I miss something?" Rygel's inventing new moves for the Lisney army, Dusty said. Lyrion raised his eyebrows and nodded. Ah, good for Rygel. Dendayo tends to use the same tactics over and over. Because they work, Dendayo said, pretending to be offended. Tried and true, as it were. Lyrion shook his head and held up the papers. Well, I've bought us passage on the Sun's Crest. She's a merchant galleon and she sails in half an hour. Not very big quarters, but we can take the animals, which is what we needed. Excellent. Thank you, Dendayo said, sounding satisfied. He nodded to Rygel and Dusty. Mount up. Let's get going. By the time they reached the village of Badwater, the snow had been joined by a whistling wind, and Rygel's fingers were freezing. He noticed another scent in the air, mingling with the briny smell of the sea that he was used to. A pungent, reeking odor that smelled like eggs. What's that smell? Dusty asked. Her nose wrinkled. Sulphuric pools, Dendayo told her. There are multiple hot springs nearby. That's why this town is called Badwater. Sulphur? Rygel repeated, puzzled. Yes. No one knows why they're in this part of the world. If we had more time, we could go look at the pools. They're quite impressive, multicolored rock and boiling sulphuric water. But we've got to get to Sia as quickly as possible. Rygel was left thinking about the pools as they moved toward the port. A large crowd of people were moving to and from the ships docked there. Hoods up, Dendayo said quietly. The last thing we want is some spy of Cato's to see us and cause trouble. He pulled his hood over his head, and the others copied him. Tickets? A gruff voice bit into Rygel's thoughts like the freezing wind. He looked up quickly, facing a burly sailor whose large nose resembled a potato. He scowled at the young boy before him. Who's with you, boy? He asked curtly. He's with me, Lyrion said swiftly, stepping forward. The sailor studied them carefully. His eyes lingered on Dusty longer than the others, and Rygel hoped desperately that the swirling snow would disguise the wild kid's fur, ears, and tail. Dusty smiled at him, but she looked nervous. You're an odd lot, I'll give you that, the sailor said finally, chewing his lip. Thank you for the keen observation, Dendayo said calmly. His green eyes glittered beneath the hood. Now, will you let us pass? The sailor's gaze swung from Dusty to Dendayo, and his eyes widened slightly. With his hood pulled up and his cloak swirling around his tall frame, Dendayo looked quite an imposing figure. The sailor finally shrugged. On board with you. We'll tend your horses. Keep that dog below decks, he added severely to Dusty as she led Tag on board. Lyrion led them to their cabin. It was small and rather stuffy, but it had a window that offered quite a view of the ocean. There were 2 cots on the wall. Rygel and Lyrion both offered to sleep on the floor, since Dendayo was still recovering, and Dusty was, after all, a wild kid princess. They set up their bedrolls as Dendayo unpacked the gear. How far is it to Kersia, Dendayo? Dusty asked at length. Dendayo's eyes were distant as he looked across the sea. Many miles, but this ship will go quickly with a favorable breeze in her sails. I'm hopeful we'll reach the capital by morning. Morning. By morning they would be entering Kersia, a place Rygel had never in his wildest dreams pictured visiting. Of course, he had never pictured that he could embark on a journey like this. This whole trip had been remarkable as he thought about it. Dusty settled down in her bed, leaning against the windowsill, watching the snow swirl around them. The gentle creaking of the ropes and the soft billow of the sails came distantly from above them. They were peaceful sounds, and Rygel felt himself relax. Sometime around midnight, he heard Dendayo and Lyrion talking quietly. Do you think he suffered? Lyrion asked in a low whisper. No, I don't. After the pain of breaking the spell was complete, you should have seen how peaceful he looked. Calm, content. He was in control of his own thoughts again. Dendayo's voice was soft. The orcs, they shot at him. He told us they did. He was injured. There were arrows in his back and one in his side. They tried to stop him, naturally. After all, if one Hayes rebels, who's to say the others won't? Cato had to snuff it out. He hasn't snuffed it out yet. Rygel heard Lyrion take a deep breath. The elven warrior's voice was still calm, but there was a note of emotion there. It wasn't surprising, though. He'd been waiting all this time, holding out hope that his brother was alive, only to have those hopes ultimately dashed by Dendayo's news. That's right, Dendayo agreed quietly, his voice gentle. Laurel wanted to make sure the spark could last, and that we didn't lose hope. He wanted us to know that we could still win. He gave up everything for that. Lyrion cleared his throat briskly. Yes, I'm very glad he did. But that doesn't mean I won't miss him. Rest, then, Dendio said gently. "Remember him as you sleep. I'll keep watch tonight." Ragel realized he'd allowed his breathing to become quiet and shallow as he strained to hear the soft voices. Now he quickly let himself breathe deeply, pretending to be fast asleep. He felt bad for eavesdropping, but it was good to hear that Dendio and Lyrion both had hope. Even with Laurel's tragic death, Lyrion had been galvanized back into the determined action that Ragel had seen in his eyes many times before. He was still ready to stop Cato. Something was wrong. His shoulder was aching, throbbing. Something had changed, some motion or sound. In the last few days, tense with danger, his senses had become attuned to different shifts in the environment, preparing to leap up and defend himself and Dusty if need be. There was an odd yellowish light in the room, lantern light, flickering slightly. Hushed voices carried from the corridor. Dendio and Lyrion's voices came from above them, their hurried whispers difficult to overhear. "We can take the back road. They won't see us. What about the horses? Hurry, go get them. I'll wake them." The door opened and closed, letting in a rush of cold night air. Ragel blinked in the sudden light, slowly waking. What was going on? The pain in his shoulder, where the wound had been, made it impossible to fall asleep again. And besides, he was starting to guess that he wouldn't be falling asleep again anyway. Something was definitely going on, and it didn't seem good. He could see the faint light of morning seeping in through the windows, barely more than a bluish white at this time. The sun hadn't risen yet, and the eastern horizon was streaked with pink and red. "What's going on?" he asked, sitting up. Dendio stood by the door and turned at his voice. "Get up and pack up your things. We're almost to Quercia. We're just going in by a different port." "Why?" Ragel asked, although he was starting to guess. Dendio's worried expression confirmed his fears even before he spoke. "There's a large group of hazes patrolling the northwestern port." "Hazes?" Dusty echoed, sitting up, her hair wildly disheveled and her eyes showing her worry. They've taken Quercia?" "I don't know. No one knows. But considering I don't see smoke and ruin, I doubt they've fought yet. More likely they're waiting in the outlying towns for Cato's command." Ragel wasn't sure what this meant, but he knew that it would be incredibly difficult to slip in around a throng of angry hazes. "What are we going to do?" he asked. Dendio's face was set in thought. "The eastern port, as far as we know, has few or no hazes. Glentree is expecting us. With any luck, he can cause enough diversion at the western port to let us slip in at the other side of the city. Then we'll ride like the blazes to get to the castle before any hazes see us." Lyrion reappeared. "The horses are all fine, but there's another problem. The ship's captain doesn't want us to disembark at all. He's afraid the hazes will see and swarm the ship." "And what did you tell him?" Dendio asked, exasperated. Lyrion shrugged slowly. "I wanted to say a lot more, but I only said I'd talk to you." "And I'll talk to him, then," Dendio said briskly, striding through the door and down the hall. "Let's go, Dusty," Ragel said, pulling on his cloak and boots, and the three of them followed the Lisney out of the room. From the look on Dendio's face, frustration mixed with a suspicious satisfaction, Ragel was rather interested to watch. 16. Quercia. Cato, the commander of the Hayes army, deputy of Saphicon, was furious. The messenger before him stared at his angry master and couldn't help trembling. Being the bearer of bad news was never desirable. It was a lot worse when you had to deliver that bad news to Cato. Cato finally turned back to him, taking a long breath as he studied the man. The messenger wasn't a Hayes. He was one of the many outlaws and brigands who had joined Cato's force a few weeks ago, simply because they had heard they were going to battle with Quercia. The Lisneys, despite their popularity with the common folk, still had many enemies, and so Cato had accepted all help gladly. He was beginning to recognize this as a mistake. The outlaws, despite being willing to fight, weren't military men. They would follow his orders, yes, but they had no sense of strategy, no respect for authority, and all around keeping an eye on them felt similar to herding cats. "Tell me again," Cato said to him finally. The messenger looked up at his master fearfully. Cato wasn't a big man. He wasn't even particularly tall. He was slim and severe, with sharp features and straight dark hair pulled back tightly at the nape of his neck. His eyes were dark too, dark and keen and glittering with barely contained fury. Nothing escaped those eyes. It was his appearance, coupled with his sly, slow, soft-spoken voice, that gave him the appearance of a vulture. "They didn't see us, my lord," the outlaw said finally. His broad accent marked him as one of the Easterners, Cato thought, one of the crime members from across the border in central Daffodilian. "Didn't really look, actually. Ship just sailed on right by." He shrugged slightly, not sure what to make of it. "Maybe they were just traders." "Traders," Cato repeated silkily. You may actually have a point there, except for the fact that our sources distinctly said that Dendayo Key is on that ship." The outlaw nodded rapidly. He knew better than to contradict his master. "With all due respect, my lord, it could be that we've been tracking a different ship. The wrong one. Lost the right one in the night, maybe." Cato paused, thinking. The man had a fair point, he realized, but there was something he knew for a fact. "We knew the Sun's Crest sailed from Badwater last night. Our spies indicated that was the ship carrying Dendayo Key back to Sia, and the ship that just passed the western harbor, the one they were supposed to dock in at, is the Sun's Crest." The outlaw shrugged helplessly. Then Cato smiled suddenly. "It is of no matter. Dendayo will come, and we will be ready for him." The messenger looked at his master, unnerved by the sudden calm in the warlord's face. "But what about Quercia? If the Lisneys hear that we're here, the Red Dawn will have us like a cat on a mouse." Cato looked at him and smiled again. The smile never reached his eyes. "I'm counting on it. Unfortunately, these mice can bite." And he strode away. It was time to ready the hazes. Dendayo took a deep breath. Raggle could see that he was barely containing his frustration. "I can't do it, sirs," the captain repeated stubbornly. He stood on the decks, arms folded, a lantern on the rail beside him. "Can't risk losing this ship and maybe the lives of my men if we try to dock. No, we're going east. We'll make port north of Catrick." "You can't be serious," Lirion said, exasperated. Dendayo motioned for him to be quiet. "I have authority in Quercia. I'm a courier. The High King will pay you well if you make port and allow us to go ashore," he said, his voice level. He still wore his hood, which kept the right side of his face in shadow, hiding his easily recognizable scar. Raggle knew his presence would cause more problems for them if the sailors knew who he was. Still, they were running out of time, and the captain clearly refused to yield. The captain, for his part, looked mildly interested as Dendayo mentioned the High King and payment. "Do you now? How much?" "Well, never mind," he said quickly. "No one's making port and no one's going ashore with those hazes prowling around. They'll board my ship and destroy my cargo with it." "Captain, please. This is of the utmost importance." Dendayo's voice was still level and calm, but there was a slight edge in his tone as he spoke. "The hazes have no interest in you or your ship. Once we're on shore, we'll lead them away from you, and you can sail away safely." The captain was shaking his head before Dendayo finished. The sailors behind him looked uncomfortable. They knew their captain, while a good seafarer, was terribly stubborn and quite arrogant. He was also fiercely protective of his ship, more importantly, of the goods on board his ship. That being said, even they could tell that the strange Lisney before them was dead serious, and they wished their captain would stop being so difficult. "I'm not stopping for you, Lisney. That's final. Now go below decks to your room and hope the hazes don't come after us as we pass," he stated loudly. Raggle looked up at Dendayo. "What will—" Dendayo stepped forward suddenly, removing his hood, and fixing the sailors with his vivid green stare. "Hard to starboard. Adjust the sheets. Make for the port." The captain whipped around, sputtering his indignation. "Are you trying to take control of my ship? You truly are—" Dendayo flashed a quick smile at him. "Actually, I just did. You are a reserve charter, are you not? And you serve Quercia?" The captain choked on his protests, totally at a loss for words. The lantern had lit Dendayo's features, highlighting his scar. The sailors all realized exactly who was speaking to them. The captain was a little too slow on the uptake. "Course I am. Who the blazes do you think you are?" he demanded angrily. Dendayo stepped close to him with frightening speed, towering over him. "More importantly is who you think you are. You are a reserve charter for the Red Dawn. Do you know what that means? That means that you answer ultimately to the commander of Quercia during times of war. Now, I think you know that we're in times of war. Just to be clear, we are moments away from a full-on battle with those hazes, and you are wasting my time." "You can't just—" the captain blustered. Dendayo smiled again, this one totally devoid of humor. "Yes, actually, I can. I am commandeering your ship and crew for approximately—" He paused, glancing toward shore, which they were rapidly approaching. 10 more minutes. The captain opened and closed his mouth several times, realizing finally that he was in the wrong, but he wasn't going to admit it. Finally, he straightened, smoothing his clothes, and snorted. Very well. Have them do what you want, sir. I'll be below decks. Dendio ignored him entirely, which clearly made him angrier, and he disappeared down below. Lovely personality, Larion commented dryly. The sailors, who were more agreeable than their captain, had submitted willingly to Dendio's authority and were bringing the ship in. Dendio murmured, glancing out over the water. See any hazes yet? They peered towards the rapidly approaching shoreline. In the half-light, it was impossible to see anything. Nothing yet, Larion said. I can smell them, Dusty said quietly. They're in the woods. Dendio looked at her. How many? The young wild kid looked unsure. I don't know. I just know they're there. There was an uneasy silence. Dendio looked back at the crew, who had overheard part of this exchange, and now looked worried. Dendio nodded to them. I wasn't lying to your captain, I promise. The hazes are after us. Once we're on shore, we'll lead them away from you, and they'll follow us. The first mate nodded slowly. With all due respect, sir, won't the hazes attack us the minute they see us offshore? They don't have any weapons to shoot at you, Larion told them. Besides that, they're very focused creatures. They'll see us on a ship and pay little to no attention to you, as long as you stay out of their way. The sailors looked a little reassured, only a little, though. Dusty made Tag sit and stroked his fur. Stay here. A good boy, she said softly. The young wolfhound was trembling, clearly able to sense the hazes, too. She looked up at two of the nearest sailors. Watch him for me, please. The men nodded. Dusty stood and bumped into Rigel. Rigel could see the unhappiness of leaving her dog in her eyes. I can't lead him through the hazes. He doesn't understand. He'll be all right, Rigel reassured her. The 3 horses had been led up on deck. They seemed to sense the hazes nearby as well as Tag, and tossed their heads anxiously. Rigel looked at Dendio, taking a breath. Okay, so once we're on shore, what do we do? Dendio was adjusting his saddle. Ride. We ride as fast as we can into town. The hazes will follow us. I'm counting on that. If we can get them all in one place, it'll be better than them scattered throughout the city, while possibly putting the common folk in danger. Rigel knew he was right. Still, the idea of deliberately drawing the hazes after them was a terrifying one. And then what? Then we get into the castle. The Red Dawn is already alerted to the danger, and should be armed and ready when we get there. And then we will fight. Fight the hazes? Dusty repeated, raising her eyebrows. Capture the hazes. Stop them. If we're going to turn them back, we need them out of battle rage, and out of Cato's reach. We'll catch as many as we can and test our theory then. Dendio tightened the girth, then checked the other 2 horses. Our sources tell us that in addition to the hazes, Cato has more help too. Orcs, outlaws, brigands. Kersia has no shortage of enemies, unfortunately. We'll be ready for them, Larion said. He had reappeared from below with the last of their gear. Dendio rooted through the packs, looking for any necessities, then removed those and handed the rest of the gear to the sailors. Keep the rest of this. Take it as thanks for your cooperation. The sailors looked grateful and nodded. Dendio nodded to the 3 companions. Mount up. Get ready to go as soon as we're on shore. The ship drew closer to the docks. The port itself consisted of 4 small buildings and the pier, which looked rather old. A thin strip of forest grew between the little port and the city main. Rigel could see the tips of the taller, elegant buildings that was part of the lavish beauty of the Kunsian capital. They would have to get there, and get there fast. His mouth was dry. There was no sign of hazes, but he was sure that they were there. His shoulder ached from their close proximity. He glanced at Dusty. Ready? Dusty smiled shakily and nodded. Dendio and Larion swung into their saddles. Larion had an arrow knocked to his bowstring, his keen eyes scanning the shore carefully. Everything was quite still, yet that was somehow more chilling. The ship drew level with the docks. The sailors let down the gangway. The planks hit the dock with a jarring thud. Quiet, Rigel murmured to no one in particular, his nerves jangling. The hazes already know we're here, Dusty reminded him softly. Might as well be fast instead of quiet. They rowed forward, down the gangway and onto the dock. It was still quite silent. The ship pulled away, moving back out to sea. Rigel could see the relieved expressions on the sailors' faces as they left the port behind. When he turned around, the hazes were in front of them. Rigel had no idea how they moved so silently, so quickly, in those shuddering, jerking movements. Dendayo's horse, nearest to them, balked and gave an uncertain whinny. Lyrion's shed to the side. Dendayo patted the black mare reassuringly, his eyes on the hazes, who were slowly stumbling toward them. "Go!" he shouted suddenly, urging the horse forward. The sudden noise and movement made the hazes pause. Dendayo fired a plume of red lightning at their feet, making them leap back. Lirion spurred his horse forward in the split-second pause that Dendayo had offered. Rigel and Dusty's horse, trained to follow Lyrion's motions, jolted forward in the same instant. Its hooves clattered on the wooden planks as it sped after Lirion. They passed the first group of hazes, who reacted too slowly. The second group lunged at them, reaching for them. The horse passed them by inches. "Hang on!" Rigel yelled back to Dusty as they galloped after Lirion and Dendayo. He had never ridden a horse in this way, and definitely never with this cold, terrified feeling in the pit of his stomach. He looked back over his shoulder. The hazes had regrouped and were coming after them. "Here they come," Dusty said softly, holding tightly to Rigel's waist. Rigel bent over the horse's neck, and they sped on. He kept his grip firm on the reins, knowing that, in the horse's terror, it might overextend itself and run itself ragged in the first few seconds of this frantic race. Then, stumbling in weariness, it would run out of stamina, and the hazes would have them. Instead, he checked the horse's head, holding it back ever so slightly. This horse was fast, he knew. It could outrun the hazes even if it wasn't at top speed. "Watch ahead," Dendayo's voice warned, and Rigel looked up in time to see a large group of orcs emerge from a side street, all of them carrying bows. Lirion rose in the saddle and fired 2 shots in rapid succession. The first slammed into the upper arm of the nearest orc, making it shout in pain, and the second slashed through another orc's throat. The second orc fell without a sound. They were nearly out of the forest, and Rigel could see houses and buildings that marked the city ahead of them, when a throng of hazes appeared out of nowhere. Dendayo saw them first, as his horse reeled back with a startled whinny. Lirion reined up sharply, uncertain for an instant. Dendayo shouted for him to keep going. In the same second, one of the orcs seized the reins of Rigel and Dusty's horse. Rigel felt the horse stumble as the orc hauled it brutally to a stop. "No!" he shouted, swinging a wild punch at the orc. He missed badly, and the orc grinned up at him, its piggy black eyes filled with malice. Rigel didn't have a weapon. There was nothing he could do, and now the hazes were catching up to them. "Hold on," he ordered Dusty, swinging down out of the saddle. Hot rage was filling him, a familiar anger, a familiar determination. He had felt it fighting the soldiers in the market back in Gayrile, and he felt it now. The orc's attention was on Dusty, who had straightened in the saddle. She snatched a spear from one of the other orcs, and was now brandishing it at their captors, keeping them back. Rigel stepped in swiftly, his eyes fixed on his target, and slammed his fist into the orc's jaw. It was the type of attack that Norn had taught him, in case he ever needed to defend himself. A quick jab followed by a larger, heavier blow when your target is stunned from the first. Norn's words echoed in his mind as he struck the orc again, slamming the palm of his hand into the orc's brutish face. The orc stumbled back, dropping the reins, snarling in pain and rage. Behind them, Rigel saw Dusty swing the spear about clumsily, not quite strong enough to keep it up. But it had the right effect. None of the orcs wanted to get close with her swinging it around. He seized the reins and handed them to Dusty, preparing to mount again. Then the young wildkid's eyes fixed on something behind him, and she screamed. Rigel felt cold, clammy hands lock around his throat, lifting him from the ground, and he saw the shifting, shivering forms that were the hazes, forming an impenetrable wall around them. "No!" he screamed, the word cut off as the haze's hand covered his mouth. He coughed and squirmed, gasping at the pain and loss of air. There was nothing he could do, no way to escape. Then from his left came a crash, followed by a brilliant flash of red, and he knew Dendayo had joined their battle. The haze's hold loosened, and Rigel gave a mighty squirm and broke free. The haze's attention seemed fixed entirely on Dendayo, who had swung down from the saddle, red lightning crackling in his palms. "Let's go!" Dusty cried. She was standing by the horse, still holding the spear. Rigel lifted a short sword one of the orcs had dropped, and together they moved toward Dendayo. The hazes swarmed around them like angry bees, their horrible echoing hisses filling the air. They were circled, completely trapped by the hazes. "Come close!" Dendayo ordered, his voice tense. The 3 of them stood, backs together, facing out into the ring. The hazes hissed and rasped their frustration as they slowly, gradually, began pressing in. Dendayo couldn't protect them from this many. The fire itself didn't hurt the hazes, just startled them. Lirion had gone to the castle, but it would be too late by the time he returned with help. This was very bad. We'll need to distract them, Dendio panted softly. I'll hold them off while you two run. Get ready on 3. 1, 2... What are you doing? Ragel had stepped forward, away from his companions, knowing, deep inside him, what needed to be done. He faced the ring of hazes, watching their shivering forms, their corpse-like skin, the anger deep in their hollow eyes. But there was something else there, too, something else in their faces. Fear. Confusion. At this point in the battle, there was no doubt that Cato was screaming commands in their minds. Most likely, he was demanding that they kill Ragel at this very moment. No wonder the hazes were agitated. No wonder they were confused. At the end of the day, they weren't alive. They were husks, as Glentree had said, shells of who they once were. Dead. It's all right, Ragel said, raising his hands and dropping the sword. We're not your enemy. The hazes barely reacted to his words, continuing to throng and surge around them. We're not your enemy, Ragel repeated, moving closer. Your names were taken, your lives destroyed, but not by us. He's hissing right now in your heads, isn't he? Cato. A few of them paused at the mention of the name. The crowd had stopped surging. They were frozen, watching him with hollow eyes. You are in Quercia, Ragel said, knowing the more details and place names he could tell them, the better. That was what had helped Laurel, and him. You were tricked, trapped by Cato. This blackness, this void that you're in right now, you can escape. There's nothing any of us can do. It has to be your choice. The hazes hissed, a few of them pawing at their heads like an injured wolf. Ragel's words were affecting them. The words Cato and Quercia had the greatest effect, Ragel saw. But at this point, he knew Cato was fighting to keep his hold on them. He remembered how bad his arm hurt when Dendio told him to remember. Remembering could hurt, he thought, but it was worth it. Grief hurt, but the memories were worth it. He thought of Norrin, who had hidden his past, the pain of it too much for him to bear. Or of Lyrion, who had lost his brother Laurel after all this time. Remember who you are, he said, taking a breath. You had families, wives, children. You were farmers, soldiers, carpenters. You are not owned by Cato. The hazes were moving around them again, sounding angry, still snarling and hissing. They pressed in closer, coming close to the companions. Ragel felt a stir of doubt and disappointment that chilled him to the core. It wasn't working. Then a voice, a cold, dripping voice that Ragel knew very well, spoke from behind the hazes. Well done, Dendio Key, Cato said dryly, pushing through the hazes. I admit I was a little worried there during the little brat's speech. He smiled. Now I'll enjoy killing you all. 17. The Choice of the Hazes. Through the circle of hazes strode Cato, deputy of Saphicon. He wasn't a big man, Ragel saw. He wore black robes that swirled around him, the high-shouldered cloak giving him the appearance of a vulture. His eyes were dark too, piercing and keen. Dendio's face was calm, though Ragel saw his hand tighten on the hilt of his sword. Cato, why are you here? Come to help turn back your army of captives? Cato's eyebrows shot up in mock surprise. Oh, is that what you are trying to do? Dear me, I wouldn't have guessed. Not like the little boy's revolting speech gave it all away, or anything. He smirked. Hazes are hazes, boy. To turn them back is impossible. It's more possible than you'd think, Ragel said, standing between Cato and his companions. At the very least, he guessed, he could stall long enough for Lyrion to reach the castle and bring the Lisny army out here to help. Cato arched an eyebrow. Oh, really? And why is that? Ragel shrugged, keeping his voice calm. Because I almost was one, and I'm here. He saw, for the first time, a flicker of doubt cross Cato's face. As it happened, the hazes seemed to grow less agitated, looking more puzzled than angry. Their thoughts, Ragel correctly guessed, correlated with their master's. To break away would require quite a bit of willpower, unless Cato was distracted enough that the hazes could remember too. Were you really? Cato said at last, the moment of doubt gone as he smiled. So you're the feisty little fellow we nearly had near the Forest of Light. How touching. Oh yes, boy, I know all about you. You want to be a guardian of Gayrile. Your father fell resisting Lord Saphicon. You were raised by Norrin the weak wizard. He smiled. Norin is still a wanted man, you know. I'll mention to Safakon where we can find him, after I'm finished here." "No!" Rigel shouted, his calm breaking, fury surging through him again. Without thinking, he lunged forward. A haze stepped in and grabbed the back of his clothes, then hauled him back, its hands pinning his arms back as he squirmed. "Hold him still," Cato ordered. He drew a lean dagger from the folds of his clothes and, almost lazily, rested it on Rigel's throat. "Now, Dendio, let's talk, shall we?" Dusty gave a cry of fear. Rigel, who wanted to resist, quickly realized that that would be a poor choice of movement, and instead was forced to be still and listen. Cato passed the knife to the haze holding Rigel, who moved back. They stood a few paces away from Cato, listening as its master spoke. Cato's back was to them as he talked to Dendio. "All along, all this waiting for conquest," Cato said, looking almost bored. "We had to wait for the Guardians of Gayrile to be disbanded, had to wait for Safakon to settle in, had to wait for the haze experiment to work, blah, blah, blah. And all this time, just so I could prepare and plan this conquest until there was no risk of failure." In another moment, Rigel had an idea. He turned his head ever so slightly, avoiding the blade of the dagger the haze now held. Hey, listen to me. You were there when I was stabbed, weren't you?" He recognized this big, burly haze, the one that had attacked Dendio. "You were there when Laurel tried to kill me." He felt the haze's grip loosen, thought he heard an intake of breath. The name Laurel had struck a chord. "That's it," Rigel whispered. "Keep the knife against my throat. That's an order," he added for good measure. The haze silently readjusted its grip. "Laurel Tarash. You know that name, don't you?" Rigel continued, keeping his voice low, his eyes on Cato's back. The warlord was speaking to Dendio still. "I'm not here for Quercia," Cato was saying in that dripping, bored tone. "Or Gayrile, for that matter. I've come for the world. My army will bring about the peace and justice that the Lisnes have failed to reach. Safakon's goal is for the good of the common folk. Can't you understand that?" "Yes, I can," Dendio said. "I can tell by the way he murdered hundreds of innocent people after the Guardians of Gayrile fell." Cato smiled, ignoring the Lisnes' sarcastic tone. "They were not innocent. No one is innocent, truly. But the hazes are the way things should be. Obedient, simple, serving, voiceless. There can be no revolts if they are voiceless, can there?" "You seek to change the mortal races," Dendio said. "It's not your place to do so." Cato smiled again. "Well, then call on your mystical highlight to save you, Dendio. See what he does. He'll do nothing, because he doesn't exist, or if he does, he clearly doesn't care." He hadn't glanced behind him, still assuming that Rigel was secure and silent in the grip of the burly haze, which was exactly what Rigel was not doing. "Laurel Tarash was my friend," Rigel continued silently to the haze. Friend was a slight exaggeration, he knew, but it was simpler than explaining. He didn't want to be a haze, so he resisted Cato. He remembered he had a family, his father, his brother, his life in Elamar. The haze made a soft grunting sound, and Rigel glanced back at it slightly. The face was still impassive, but the shivering, shifting of its outline had stopped. Its form had solidified. Several of the hazes around them had noticed, too. They had moved a little closer, their eyes hostile. They knew nothing of what was going on, only that Rigel was doing something to their comrade. "Remember your past," Rigel continued in a trembling whisper. The terror of the hazes pressing in around him had sent adrenaline coursing through his body. Any moment now, one of them would get tired of him and run him through with the dagger. "You are from Quercia, from Elamar, from the southern fiefs." He couldn't remember any of the names of the southern fiefs, and hesitated for a moment. "Remember your names," he said simply. The big haze that held him had loosened its grip on the dagger. Rigel, very carefully, eased himself out of its grip, then turned to face his captor. The bigger haze, along with 4 of its companions near it, had a solid form. The haze that had been holding Rigel looked different in some way. Rigel didn't realize why. Then he saw the spots of color beginning to leak through on the haze's gray and black form, like steam slowly clearing from glass. The hazes fell to their knees and cried out, voices human and loud. Cato whipped around at the sound, saw Rigel, and his face went livid. "You! What are you doing? What have you done?" He charged forward. Rigel saw Dendio start after him desperately, but 2 orcs moved forward and restrained him. Rigel stepped back, helpless before the furious warlord. Then a dark shape rose up between Cato and Rigel, stopping the warlord in his tracks. Half in color, half gray, but still a solid form, raising a hand to stop his former master. Cato froze, staring, dumbfounded. "What? You?" The former haze stood shakily. As his shape became clearer, the color coming back to his form, Rigel saw him to be a younger man, with sandy hair, wearing the simple garb of a mill worker. "My name is Corin," the man gasped, his voice growing stronger. "I lived in Elamar. I worked the mills. I was the strongest one there. You took me. You forced me to follow you. The enhanced blades turned me into one of them." Cato gave a snarl and drew out a second knife, raising it, but a hand clutched over his, and he turned to see another half-haze, this one a middle-aged man in fine armor. "My name is Norta," he informed the warlord. "I was a warrior, the captain of the town guard in the southern fiefs. You lied to us. You promised prosperity and strength, not blind captivity." Cato wrenched his arm free and shoved Norta back, then rounded on Rigel. But a third haze got shakily to his feet, a young man with a thin face and dark hair. "I was Gayrilian," he stammered. "My name is Everett Morris. I lived in his town," he added, nodding to Rigel. "He played games with my younger cousins." "Did he?" Cato sneered and looked at Rigel. "How very touching. Unfortunately, boy, you've only worsened their fate." He raised the knife with blinding speed and slashed across Everett's throat. The man stumbled and fell without a sound. "No!" Rigel screamed, horror and grief and rage surging through him. Cato shouted an order. 5 rough-looking outlaws shoved their way through the uncertain hazes. 2 of them hauled Rigel to his feet. Cato turned back to Dendio and Dusty, who had watched wordlessly, restrained by the orcs. "Turning them back to what they were fixes nothing. They have no value to me. I'll kill them all anyway. Risk your lives for them. They'll die with you." He nodded to the guards. The soft hiss of steel on leather told Rigel, with sinking finality, that it was all over. And then a new voice, clear, with cold authority and firm determination, spoke from behind the crowd. "I think that will be enough, Cato." Everyone turned. Striding down the street was a tall Lisney, clad in a fine suit of dark leather, his cloak blowing slightly in the chill wind. A simple band of gold rested on his brow. He looked much like Dendio, Rigel saw, and a passion glittered in his green eyes. Behind him walked Lirion and Glentree, and behind them an entire legion of Kersia's troops. Jean Key spoke, his voice dangerously calm. "Your hazes have turned against you. Surrender now, and spare yourself and the lives of those who still follow you much pain." For just a moment, Rigel was sure Cato would agree to this. The outlaws and orcs he had with him wouldn't stand a chance against the warriors of Sia. But then his face darkened, and he raised his dagger. "Fight!" he shouted, and the soldiers behind him surged forward to meet the defenders. Rigel had thought and dreamed of battle for so long that he had created some assumptions about what it would be like. He only pictured a glorious clashing of good and evil, the sound of steel on steel, the shouts of triumph from the valiant. What he hadn't pictured, or ever thought about, was the noise, the clanging of swords on shields, which sounded about the same as the clatter of pots and pans, the shuffling, grunting, growling sounds that came from the mass of swarming, slashing warriors, and the screams, cries of pain and fear, the smell of blood, the dull thump of bodies hitting the cobblestones. He stumbled back, sickened at the horror. A hand gripped his arm, and he turned to see Dusty. "Are you all right?" she asked anxiously. "Yeah." Rigel took a breath, steadying himself. The fight raged on beyond them. He half wanted to lift his weapon and charge in, but he knew he would probably get himself killed in the first few moments. He looked at the hazes. 2 had followed Cato's order to fight, though they were doing so with slow, uncertain movements quite unlike their usual swift and deadly attacks. The others, 30 or 40 of them, stood or knelt in silence. Several of them had solid forms and were beginning to come into color. Where was Cato? The thought crossed his mind suddenly, and he straightened, realizing that in the chaos of the battle they had lost sight of the warlord. "Where's Cato?" he asked, looking around. Dusty's keen eyes scanned the roadside for an instant. Then she pointed. "There! He's trying to get away!" Rigel looked where she pointed. In the snowy fields lining the road, near the farmsteads outside of the city, he could see a dark figure moving quickly. "Doesn't seem to want to stay and watch his war," Dusty commented. Raggle shook his head. No, come on. He lifted his dagger and started down the road, then turned into the field. The Red Dawn could handle the hazes, that much he knew. But if Cato escaped, if he reached Saphicon... A surge of fear flowed through Raggle, suddenly giving him the strength to run all the faster. If Cato escaped, Norrin would die, and life on Gayrile would get even worse. In another moment, Raggle had nothing else in his mind. He would protect his home, his life, and all that he had there. It would be saved. His father's blood pumped through his veins, the blood of a guardian of Gayrile determined to fight, as he ran, racing after the escaping warlord. He caught up to Cato in another moment. The warlord had stopped, turned, raising the blade that had so recently killed Everett Morris. His eyes held a maddened hate that made Raggle hesitate for just an instant. He swung at the vulture-like figure, missed, then leapt back quickly as Cato slashed at him. There was a smooth, purposeful motion in Cato's attack that sent chills down his spine, and he knew that he was facing a skilled warrior. "Coward," Cato hissed. "You're a coward, boy. I have heard your thoughts. I know what you fear. You're afraid of loss, of Saphicon. Mostly, you're afraid of disappointing your father and your ratty wizard Norrin." He smiled. "It'll be easier if you were dead. You're just prolonging their disappointment this way." The words cut to the core. Raggle gritted his teeth and lunged at Cato again, catching Cato's blade across the flat of his own, the two daggers giving off a reverberating screech. Raggle ducked beneath another strike and lunged up, missed, and in the split second that he pulled back, he felt Cato's knife bite across his wounded shoulder. The wound, which had been aching dully this whole time due to the closeness of the hazes, flared to agony. His vision blurred for an instant, and he staggered, falling. Cato's face, blurry through tears, smiled. "You're all mine now, boy," came the hissing whisper, echoing in both Raggle's thoughts and reality. "There's no one to help you now." "No," Raggle gasped, blinded by the pain. He could feel cold numbness setting in, knew the blade was enchanted. The fog was filling his mind. It would be so easy to just give in. Let go. Forget it all. Forget your weakness and your fear. You will be made stronger. Raggle took a shaking breath and raised his head, forcing his mind to clear. The wound flared with pain, but it was the best kind of pain, the pain of successful resistance. "My name is Raggle of Gayrile," he gasped, his voice trembling. He got to his knees. "I am not a haze." "But you can be. You will be great, powerful, stronger than anyone on Orlell." "My father's name was Marin," Raggle continued, talking over the hissing voice. He wasn't sure if the voice was in his head or not. His own voice grew stronger. "My father's name was Marin, and he was a guardian of Gayrile. He protected people, fought for people. He was killed by Saphicon. I am not a haze." "Fool, you're giving up. Just relax, and let the fog take you. You will become powerful." Raggle shook his head. The movement jarred his injured shoulder, and he gave a weak cry of pain. But a new emotion was flooding through him, a fierce rage, the same that had filled him at the marketplace in Gayrile, the same that he had felt when the hazes attacked. He looked up, and stood slowly, his shoulder throbbing, but the numbness and fog receding from his mind. "My name is Raggle of Gayrile," he repeated, stronger, "and I am ready to fight you, Cato." Cato had watched with growing surprise, then admiration. The boy, despite his youth and emotions, had resisted a second time. "You're a strong one, boy," he said with a slow smile. "You'd be a fine addition to Saphicon's forces." He arched an eyebrow. "What say you to that? Join Saphicon, not as a haze, but as a captain." Raggle forced away the last of the fog, looked up, and met Cato's cold black eyes. The fear, the feelings of worthlessness, had faded, driven out by the knowledge that he was significant, to Norrin and to his father, and to the Highlight and to so many others. And he felt himself smile. "I'm not in the mood for joining tyrants." Cato looked as shocked as the soldiers had. Then fury replaced it. "You little wretch!" he snarled, stepping forward. A small dark shape suddenly leapt in, holding the broken head of a spear, springing onto Cato's back. Cato lurched at the sudden weight, squirming, fighting to break the hold of the small furry hands that had clamped over his face. Dusty held tight, holding the spearhead between her teeth. "Go!" she mumbled through the steel. "Run!" Cato reeled back, into the building behind them, crushing Dusty between his body and the house. Dusty, stunned, dropped to the ground, gasping for air. Cato raised his dagger, hauling her upright by her hair. Dusty screamed in fear and anger and squirmed, but he held her tightly. "You're dead, little beast," he snarled, and then he laughed. "Let this stand as the weak attempt to stop the great Cato, the feeble attempts of two little ones." He placed the blade against Dusty's throat. And he was still laughing when Rygel, acting more on instinct than on any sort of skill, flung the dagger at him. The blade spun once and struck him, flat-bladed, across the back. Cato leapt up, Dusty forgotten for a moment, startled by the brief intense pain. Dusty's hand closed on the spearhead, and she plunged it upward, into Cato's side, between the ribs. Cato gasped, stumbled back, the dagger falling from his hands. Rygel grabbed Dusty's arm and pulled her away from the dying warlord, both of them shaking. Footsteps pounded behind them, and they turned to see Jean and Dendayo running over. Dendayo paused beside them, studying them carefully. "Are you too hurt?" Rygel, his mouth too dry to say anything, shook his head. Jean had moved to the still form of Cato. Blood seeped through the dark robes into the snow. Cato took a rasping breath, his eyes fixing on the king. He smiled slowly, his eyes glittering. "This isn't over for you," he panted. "Saphacon will be your defeat. He will have first Gayrile, then the mainland. He is coming. What he has created, you can't stop it. The jewel will consume you, and—" He trailed off, coughed, and then his eyes glazed and his rasping breathing stopped. There was a long, stunned silence. Then, slowly, the reality set in that they had won, and from behind, the cheering started.